Hi folks, HR Funk here. Back in front of the camera with my DS Arms SA-58 rifle. The SA-58 is manufactured right here in the United States by DS Arms, and it is a clone of the famous FN-FAL battle rifle. I first started working with this rifle back in the fall of 2024. I produced a series of videos with this rifle, and I have very much enjoyed working with it. And if you saw my wrap-up video from 2024, my favorite firearm of 2024 is specifically what the title of that video was, you know that this was the runner-up for the title. It almost won as my favorite firearm of 2024, but I still go back and forth every now and again on that decision. It lost out to a very, very nice Smith & Wesson Model 27 that I also added during the last calendar year. In any case, when I first acquired this rifle, I was aware that DS Arms manufactured a scope rail and an optic specifically for this type of rifle. And I've been looking forward to working with the optic ever since then. And recently I got the rail and the optic, and in this video I'm going to give you a close-up look at both the rail and the optic. I'll demonstrate the installation of the rail, and also we'll head out to the range and do a little bit of shooting and see how the SA-58 performs with the optic installed. So here we go. By way of introduction, the scope rail that I mentioned during the opening of this video, if you go to the DSA website, is identified as the Extreme Duty Scope Mount, and it simply replaces the original top cover on the SA-58 rifle. I'll demonstrate that installation here in a few moments. The optic is designated as the Battle Rifle Optic, or BRO, and currently these are being sold as a package together, but you don't have to use them together. You can use the Extreme Duty Scope Rail with any scope or any type of optic that would be appropriate for mounting on a 1913 style rail. And you can use the Battle Rifle Optic on any other firearm you might want to. You can either mount it to a 1913 style rail, or it's also designed to be mounted to the carry handle of an AR-15/M16 rifle, so that's pretty cool. In any case, let's get right to the up-close look at the Extreme Duty Scope Mount, the Battle Rifle Optic, and then we'll get out to the range and do some shooting. Before I get started on the mounting process, there are a couple of things I want to mention. First off, this specific Battle Rifle Optic and Extreme Duty Scope Rail were provided to me by DS Arms for this review. By the way, I want to say thanks to Mark at DS Arms for providing these items. Without his assistance, this video would not be possible. Also, when I received these, the optic was already mounted to the rail, and if you look closely, you'll notice there's a difference in the attachment method as opposed to what we typically see with something that's mounted to a 1913 style rail. Specifically, there are no cross bolts holding the optic to the rail. Rather, there are screws that come up through from the bottom to secure it in place. There are both positive aspects and negative aspects to this method of attachment. On the positive side, since there are no parts necessary for the cross bolts to pass through, the optic mounts lower to the top of the rail and thereby closer to the bore axis than would otherwise be possible. Also, since the body of the optic is one piece to this part that mounts to the rail, there is no need to level the reticle inside the optic as you are installing the optic, because as long as everything is square inside, once this is installed to the top of the rail, the reticle should be level. So that makes it a little bit more convenient. You're not going to spend half an hour trying to rotate this a little bit one way or a little bit the other way to try to level that reticle. On the negative side, if you decide to remove this optic or replace it with a different one, it's going to be a little bit more involved than just simply removing the nuts that would typically be on the side of the mount and removing the optic. Rather, you would have to remove this entire top cover, then remove the screws in order to take the optic off and replace it or what have you. So there are some positive aspects, as I said, and some negative aspects. Also, when I received this particular optic and cover, there were no instructions that came with them. So I had to figure this out on my own. And it was not particularly difficult. It took me 15 minutes or so to figure out exactly how everything went together. But I did put it all together once, then I took it all back apart so I could demonstrate it for all of you. But one of the things that puzzled me, since I did not get instructions, was the fact that there were 5 of these little hex head filler screws, and I could not figure out what their purpose was, but I think I have discovered at this point what they're supposed to do. If you're not mounting an optic the way this one is mounted, those filler screws fit in these holes, so you'll be able to use those to keep any debris or foreign material or rain or what have you from entering into your receiver through these holes. So I believe that's their purpose. That's my best guess anyway, and they do fit those holes, so that seems to fit. There's a little bit of Loctite on each one of these things to make sure it stays in place also. Along with the rail, there are 5 of these rail sections, and each one of these has 2 screws that correspond with the holes in the side of the scope mount itself and these little rail sections. There's an extra screw that comes along, so if you lose one or what have you, you do have another one. So the first thing I'm going to do is start to install these little rail sections on the inside of the rail mount itself, and I'll show you exactly how that's done. So if you look closely at these little rail sections, you'll notice at the top there is a portion that is relieved at either side, and on the bottom there is a groove. Inside of our top cover, you'll see there are also cutouts that more or less correspond with the contour of this top portion of the rail. So that tells you which direction these little rail sections go. When you place them inside the receiver, this cutout is going to go toward what would be the top if we were holding it right side up. And the little groove goes toward the bottom. So I'm going to hold that in place there, and I'm going to take a couple of screws, and I'm only going to just start these screws so it holds the little rail section in place. I want there to be enough play in these things that that little section of rail can move somewhat when we start trying to slide it onto the receiver of the SA58. So I'm just going to get it started finger tight there, not even tight, just started with my fingers there. And there are 2 of these on the right hand side that you see here, and 3 on the left hand side, and I'm going to install each one of those little sections in the exact same way. So I now have all 5 of the rail sections in place that you see here, and all of the screws are extremely loose. There's a lot of movement here, which is going to be necessary when I start to install this onto the receiver. And essentially what I have done, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to get a view here where you can see it, is those little rail sections have made a channel that you can see right there, and that's going to slide inside of the groove on the receiver where the standard top cover usually rests, and it's going to be captured by this outside section, and when we tighten the screws down, that will hold everything in place. Turning our attention to the rifle itself, you can see that I have it secured in my vise, and I don't have this cranked down extremely tight, but I have it just snug enough to secure it. And also I have this 2x4 under the magazine well to support the weight of the rifle itself as it projects back out of the vise here. It has been safety checked. The action is cocked. Remember, in order to remove the bolt from this rifle, the action does have to be in the cocked position. And I am going to open the action, and I'll remove the bolt and carrier, and I'll remove the original top cover. Now you notice the way that slid out of the receiver, and you can see the flared sections, maybe you can, on the side of the top cover there that fit into that groove. That is what these little rail sections are going to slide into as I start to install it onto the receiver. I did notice when I was working on this before that a little bit of oil helped this process tremendously. And we'll see if I can get it started again. And I might have one side just a little tighter than the other side, I'm not sure. And wow, that went into place much easier that time. I actually had to stop the camera and check, but yes, it is properly in place. And apparently the last time I had one or more of these sections a little tighter and it did not slide on nearly as easy, but that went on very easily that time. So next, I am going to tighten down the screws. Just to help secure those sections in place. And even still, I'm not going to tighten them down extremely tight. This is all just test fitting at this point. And once I snug them down just a little bit, I am going to reinstall the bolt and carrier, and we'll do a function test to make sure everything is working properly. Okay, everything is snug. Let's reinstall the bolt and carrier. And something is in the way. Let's check and see what that is. As it turned out, there wasn't anything in place, just the bolt was dropping down a little bit as I was trying to install it, and the receiver was stopping it. So I pushed up a little bit on the bolt, it slides into place. Now I'll close the rifle. And again, we'll do that function test. Bolt moves freely, the rifle on safe, doesn't fire. Rifle on fire, it does fire. Action cycle's fine. So now what I'm going to do is remove each one of these screws, put a little bit of Loctite on it, and then screw them back in place. This time I'm going to snug these down to the point that when the Loctite dries, I want them to stay in place. I'm not going to show you the entire process of Loctiting and installing each screw, but I will demonstrate one time the way I do this. The first thing I do is clean the screw to make sure there is no oil or dirt or foreign material or anything else on there that's going to interfere with the Loctite's ability to adhere to the inside surface. And then I'm going to put just a little Loctite on here. My feeling with Loctite is less is more. So I do not want a tremendous amount on there. There are times if I think there's a little bit too much on there, I will wipe it off on my cloth here. That's why I have that in place. So if there's more than I want, I can take a little bit off. And then I'm just going to snug this screw. As I said, I did not get instructions, so I don't have any torque specifications. But I'm just going to get them good and snug after I get the Loctite in place. And there, I just dropped one. Now I'll finish this process. I've got all 6 screws on this side of the receiver done. I'll do the screws on the other side, and then we'll move on from there. And there's the scope rail and the optic in place. All the screws are snugged, they're all Loctited. I'll wait for the Loctite to cure before I start to do any sort of shooting, but I can at least tell you a little bit about the optic while we're waiting. The DS Arms Battle Rifle Optic is a prism scope that features a fixed magnification level of 4 power. It has a rotating fast focus eyepiece here at the rear of the optic for focusing the reticle inside. The reticle is illuminated, and it has 11 illumination settings that are controlled by rotating this dial on top. The illumination is powered by a single CR2032 battery stored in a compartment on top of this dial, and as I said, you rotate the dial to cycle through progressively brighter and brighter illumination settings until you get back to 0, which is the off setting. I can't find a measurement for the objective lens on the BRO, but as best I can measure, it seems to be about 36 millimeters. It is intended to give the shooter a wide field of view. The DS Arms Battle Rifle Optic has a section of 1913 rail here at the front for installation of an auxiliary sight, and if you don't like this, it is removable. There are 2 small screws here at the back. You can remove those and this rail comes off. This optic does have covered windage and elevation adjustment turrets that you see here, And when we remove the cover, you can see that these are not finger adjustable. You will need a screwdriver or similar tool in order to make sight corrections. And these are graduated in 1/2 minute of angle clicks. So they're not 1/4 minute of angle, not 1 minute of angle like we see with other optics. These are 1/2 minute of angle clicks. So keep that in mind if you're making those sight corrections. One thing I wanted to try to show you with regard to the mount is the fact that it does have a see-through cutout, so that if you would have a problem with the optic, you can still use the iron sights. Here I'm looking through the rear aperture at the front sight, and you can see the front sight post there. This is very difficult to get on the camera, but I did want to point it out. This is an illustration of the battle rifle optics reticle, and it requires a little bit of explanation. The shape projecting down from the top that looks sort of like a pencil is called the obelisk. The point at the very tip of the obelisk should be sighted in for a distance of 200 meters on a 21-inch rifle. When that's done with standard NATO spec ammunition, the aiming dots below correspond with the bullets drop at 300 meters, 400 meters, and 500 meters. This changes, however, when you're sighting in a rifle that has a 16-inch barrel. With a 16-inch rifle, the tip of the obelisk should be sighted in for a distance of 100 meters, after which the aiming dots correspond to the bullets drop at a distance of 200 meters, 300 meters, and 400 meters. Again, this is with NATO spec ammunition having bullets of 147 to 150 grains. The horizontal lines that you see on the right and left hemispheres of the reticle are intended to be used for a moving target lead, and depending upon your distance from the target and the speed at which it's moving, they can be used to estimate the hold in order to place accurate shots on that moving target. A few days ago, the weather here in northern Ohio finally improved to the point that I could get out to the range and do some shooting with the SA-58 now having the battle rifle optic mounted to it. The first order of business was to zero the optic, which I did, starting at a distance of 100 yards. Now I know I just got done saying the 21-inch rifle you're supposed to zero at 200 meters, but I wanted to start out at 100 yards so I could compare the accuracy that I was getting there with what I typically see from other rifles at that distance. After I got the zero complete, I fired a 3-shot group, and here's how that went. Now, as you saw, I had 2 good headshots from that distance of 100 yards and then 1 shot that was low, pretty much right in the throat. And one of the things I have to keep reminding myself is the SA-58 is a battle rifle with a battle rifle optic shooting M80 ball military ammunition. It is not a precision rifle with a high magnification optic shooting match ammunition. So when we think about it in that context, the 2 shots that were basically right in the center of the head definitely were good shots, and that shot through the throat that clipped the spine would also have been equally effective on the battlefield. So I'm not feeling too bad about that accuracy, but I did do a little bit more work and a little bit more tweaking with my zero at that distance of 100 yards. Then I fired another 3-shot group to the body of the target. Here's how that went. I don't know if you're able to see it in the video with the subdued anatomical diagram on that target, but all 3 of those shots fired that time around were on the diagram of the heart, dead center in the target, and that 3-shot group center to center measured just over 3 inches, about 3¼ inches center to center. So I would say that is not half bad for a battle rifle. At this point, I was running out of both time and ammunition, but I wanted to get at least a couple of shots at a greater distance than 100 yards. So I ran over to the 200-yard range, I threw the target up on the target board, I got back to the 200-yard line, I added 2 minutes of angle to the battle rifle optic, and then I fired off 2 rounds at the body of the target from that distance of 200 yards, and here's how that went. And those 2 shots went into minute of enemy soldier with no problem whatsoever. They were a little bit low on the target. You saw that they were down in the lower abdomen. So had I had more time, I would have dialed in a proper 200-yard zero, but I didn't have any more time. But rest assured, that's not the last you're going to see of the SA-58 with the battle rifle optic. On another day, when I have more time, I'm going to get back out and do some more extended range shooting. So there you go, folks. That's my review of the SA-58 with the Extreme Duty Scope mount and the battle rifle optic, all available from DS Arms. If you have any questions or comments about this video, as always, make sure you forward those to me. Remember, stop by my website, hrfunk.com, check out all the news and information there so you can see the latest things going on with me and the channel, and go by the products page because a lot of the products I've reviewed have links to the manufacturers on that page, and there's information beneath a lot of those links that's going to save you some money if you decide to make a purchase. See you next time, folks. And until then, good shooting. Bye-bye.